Welcome back to the deep dive. When you're trying to really get your head around like a big shift in the economy,
Yeah,
especially something as significant as international trade,
absolutely.
you want to get straight to like what really matters. What's the real impact
Did it.
without getting lost in, endless reports and opinions and
Right. Wading through all of it. Yeah,
exactly. That's why we're here today.
for sure.
We are diving deep today into a major development. President Trump's implementation just yesterday, March 27, 2025, of a substantial 25% tariff on all imported vehicles and auto parts coming from our close trading partners,
Oh, yeah.
Mexico and Canada.
Big one.
Yeah,
This is a move that's generating a lot of discussion, and rightly so.
cute.
I mean, these tariffs, they're not a minor adjustment, right? We're looking
Yeah.
initially at over $1 trillion in imports
Wow.
affected. And then as some of the temporary exemptions expire in April, that figure's going to jump to an enormous 1.4 trillion.
Gosh.
So yeah, for anyone trying to understand the bigger picture here, the potential consequences are huge.
Exactly. And for you, our listener, our mission today is very clear.
Yeah.
We're going to sift through the expert analysis, pull out the most critical insights, and really focus on what this means for the economies of Mexico and Canada.
Absolutely. Let's unpack this.
So let's unpack it. Let's start with the reasoning behind this.
Sure.
What's the core objective of this tariff policy in the first place?
So the policy is driven by a couple of key goals. Primarily, as you've likely heard it, aims to reduce the U.S. trade deficit.
Right.
The idea is by imposing this 25% tariff making imported vehicles and parts more expensive, American consumers and businesses will be less inclined to buy them.
Makes sense.
This should lead to a decrease in imports and consequently a smaller trade deficit.
Okay.
The second objective, which is closely linked to the first, is to stimulate domestic production.
Right.
By increasing the cost of imports, the hope is that it will become more appealing for companies to manufacture vehicles and auto parts within the United States,
Got it.
boosting American jobs and industries.
Okay, so that's the aim. Make imports more expensive so we buy American.
Right.
But as you mentioned, there are always different angles here.
Of course.
What are some of the counter arguments being raised by critics of this policy?
So the main concerns tend to center on a couple of key areas that will likely impact everyone, either directly or indirectly.
Okay.
First, there's the very real potential for increased costs for consumers here in the U.S.
Right.
If these tariffs make imported vehicles and parts more expensive for American companies,
Yeah.
it's highly probable that these costs will be passed on to the consumer
Of course.
in the form of higher prices for new cars,
Makes sense.
potentially even for repairs if parts become more expensive.
Right.
Second, we need to consider the impact on international relations.
Yeah.
Imposing such significant tariffs can strain our relationships with crucial trading partners like Mexico and Canada.
Of course.
This could lead to retaliatory measures, which we'll discuss in a bit, as well as broader trade disputes.
Yeah, those are definitely some serious concerns.
Ugh.
Okay, so let's start by looking at Mexico.
Okay.
Their economy is so deeply intertwined with ours, particularly in the automotive sector.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you give us a sense of just how integrated these two economies really are in this area?
The level of integration is remarkable. Over decades, facilitated by various trade agreements, we've seen the development of incredibly complex cross-border manufacturing.
Wow.
You might have engine components made in the U.S. shipped to Mexico for assembly into a larger module, and then that module comes back to the U.S. to be part of the final vehicle.
Okay.
The automotive sector has really embraced this model to take advantage of different efficiencies and cost structures in both countries.
Right.
So for you to appreciate the potential impact, think of any significant barrier to this intricate flow of goods.
Right.
It's bound to create significant disruptions.
That's fascinating. I mean, to think about how interconnected it all is.
Yeah, it really is.
What parts of the Mexican economy are most at risk under these tariffs?
So the analysis clearly identifies the automotive industry in Mexico as being the most significantly exposed.
Uh-huh.
Given these intricate supply chains we just described, a 25% tariff adds a very substantial cost.
Yeah.
Beyond the automotive sector, the electric equipment sector in Mexico is also highlighted as being at considerable risk again, due to its strong reliance on cross-border trade with the U.S.
Okay, so those are the two big ones, automotive and electric equipment.
Exactly.
What kind of economic consequences are being predicted if these tariffs remain in place?
The projections are quite concerning. Some economists are warning of a potential severe recession in Mexico.
Wow.
The figures being discussed suggest a possible 12% decline in their total exports.
Gosh.
And if these tariffs persist for a sustained period, we can see a 4% contraction of Mexico's entire GDP in 2025 alone.
That's a huge hit to their economy.
Your 4% GDP drop is a very significant economic shock.
Absolutely. What are some of the key business voices in Mexico saying about all of this?
Well, the American Chamber of Commerce in Mexico has been quite vocal in expressing their worries.
Okay.
Their assessment is that these tariffs will ultimately harm both the Mexican and the U.S. economies.
Interesting.
Furthermore, they argue that these trade barriers won't actually address some of the other critical issues that exist between the two countries, such as security migration and drug trafficking.
So from their viewpoint, it's economic pain without really solving the underlying problems.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift our focus north and look at Canada.
Sure.
Similar to Mexico, they're a massive trading partner, and their automotive sector is also deeply intertwined with ours.
Absolutely. Canada is highly dependent on trade with the United States. And just as with Mexico, the automotive sector plays a vital role.
Right.
Again, we see very similar patterns of complex cross-border supply chains
Uh-huh.
with parts and finished vehicles moving back and forth across our shared border.
Yeah.
This deep level of integration means that tariffs of this size can have a really significant impact on Canadian businesses and workers.
Okay, so which sectors in Canada are expected to feel the biggest strain from these tariffs?
Not surprisingly, the automotive industry in Canada is facing the most immediate and substantial threat.
Right.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has even estimated that potentially 500,000 jobs in Ontario's automotive sector alone could be at risk.
Gosh.
That's a significant portion of the province's workforce.
That's a scary number.
Yeah, it is.
Beyond automotive, what other industries are they worried about?
So beyond the automotive sector, the mineral processing industry in Canada is also identified as one that could face considerable challenges due to reduced export volumes heading south.
Okay, 500,000 jobs in just one Canadian province. I mean, those are alarming numbers.
Yeah, it's a very real concern.
What are the predictions looking like for Canada under these tariffs for the overall economy?
The analysis suggests a worrying outlook. There's a real possibility of Canada entering a recession within the next 6 months if these tariffs are maintained.
Oh,
The increased costs resulting from the tariffs are likely to translate into higher prices for Canadian businesses that rely on imported U.S. auto parts.
right.
And ultimately, those costs can be passed on to consumers, further adding to existing economic pressures.
So the impact isn't limited to just Ontario, is it?
That's right.
I recall seeing some information about potential job losses in Quebec as well.
Yes, projections for Quebec indicate potentially up to 100,000 job losses directly linked to these tariffs.
Wow, so the impact is going to be felt across multiple regions of Canada.
Most likely, yes, any region with significant automotive or related industries.
So we're potentially looking at massive shifts in the flow of goods across North America.
Right.
How are these tariffs expected to affect the overall bilateral trade relations between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada?
Well, we should anticipate a significant disruption to the established trade patterns.
Uh-huh.
The intricate North American supply chains that have been developed over many years are now facing a major challenge. The increased cost of importing vehicles and parts will inevitably lead to delays,
Right.
higher production costs, and potentially even a fundamental rethinking of where companies choose to manufacture their goods.
So this could lead to some pretty substantial shifts in where companies decide to do business, right?
Precisely, companies might start seriously considering reconfiguring their supply chains
Okay.
to try and avoid these tariffs altogether.
Yeah.
It could mean relocating production facilities either back to the U.S. to avoid import duties or to other countries that aren't subject to these tariffs.
Right.
They might also look at sourcing materials and components from alternative markets.
Okay.
However, these kinds of shifts come with significant costs and logistical hurdles. It's not a simple or quick process.
Yeah, it would be a whole reshuffling of the deck.
Absolutely.
What does all of this mean for existing trade agreements like USMCA,
Right. The USMCA.
which was designed to facilitate smoother trade among these three countries?
Yeah, these tariffs definitely put a strain on the very foundation of agreements like the USMCA.
Right.
The fundamental purpose of such agreements is to lower trade barriers, not to erect new ones.
Right.
So it's not surprising that we're hearing calls from Canadian officials for renegotiations to specifically address these new trade barriers.
Interesting.
Their argument is that the current agreement doesn't account for this type of protectionist measure and therefore needs to be updated to reflect this new reality.
Okay, so the initial reactions haven't been subtle.
Not really, though.
What kind of actions and mitigation strategies are we seeing from the Canadian government?
So the Canadian government has taken a fairly direct approach.
Okay.
They've already announced the imposition of retaliatory tariffs on approximately $20 billion worth of goods coming from the United States.
Wow.
This is a clear signal of their displeasure and a move designed to exert pressure back on the U.S.
Got it.
Beyond that, Prime Minister Mark Carney has emphasized the need for Canada to really rethink and reimagine its own economy
Okay.
to ensure it can thrive in this altered trade landscape.
So looking inward and perhaps looking for other trading partners as well.
Exactly. Diversification will be key.
How are businesses reacting on the ground?
Businesses are exploring a variety of strategies to cope with these new costs. Some might try to absorb the additional expense of the tariffs themselves,
Okay.
hoping to maintain their market share. Others might have no alternative but to increase the prices they charge to consumers.
Right.
We're also seeing examples of major automakers, like General Motors and Ford, actively reassessing their current supply chains
Okay.
to identify areas where they can minimize disruptions and maintain their competitiveness in this new tariff environment.
Yeah.
This could involve seeking out alternative suppliers or making adjustments to their manufacturing processes.
Okay, so a lot of scrambling and figuring out Plan B.
Pretty much.
We've covered a lot of ground today. Let's try to distill some of the key takeaways from all this analysis.
Okay, sounds good.
What are the main points people should remember?
Right. So to recap, the primary goal of these tariffs is to address what the U.S. perceives as trade imbalances and to encourage more manufacturing within the United States. However, the analysis strongly indicates that Mexico's automotive and electric equipment sectors are particularly vulnerable and face a significant risk of economic downturn.
Right.
Similarly, Canada's automotive and mineral processing industries are looking at substantial risks,
Uh-huh.
with the potential for very significant job losses, particularly in provinces like Ontario and Quebec.
So it's not just about the impact on our neighbors, is it?
No, not at all.
What are the likely consequences for American consumers?
U.S. consumers who purchase imported vehicles and auto parts are likely to experience price increases.
Okay.
This could disproportionately affect middle-class consumers who often rely on more affordable import options.
Right.
We've also noted that Canada has already responded with equivalent retaliatory tariffs on a wide array of U.S. goods, and they've implemented domestic economic stimulus measures to try and cushion the impact on their economy.
And those temporary exemptions that were initially in place, they've now expired, haven't they?
Yes, the temporary exemptions for Canada and Mexico expired in April of 2025.
Oh.
So the full 25% tariff is now in effect across the board.
Wow.
For vehicle and auto part imports from both countries, this means the impact is now much more widespread and immediate.
So looking ahead, what can we anticipate?
We can anticipate continued disruptions to North American supply chains, potentially higher overall production costs for many industries, and certainly increased pressure to revisit and potentially revise existing trade agreements like the USMCA.
Right.
Finally, businesses are increasingly exploring diversifying their supplier bases beyond just Mexico and Canada,
Okay.
and looking at how technology can help them reduce costs
Yeah.
and adapt to these evolving trade conditions.
It's clear from the analysis that these newly imposed tariffs are a really significant economic event
Definitely.
with potentially far-reaching consequences not only for Mexico and Canada, but also for the U.S. economy and for everyone as a consumer.
Absolutely.
The deep interconnectedness of these North American economies means that disruptions in one sector like the automotive industry can have ripple effects that impact a wide range of other industries.
Yeah, any industry that relies on those supply chains is going to feel it.
So much to think about here.
Yeah. And as you think about the swift and significant economic ripples we're already seeing and anticipating from these tariffs, it really prompts a bigger question.
What's that?
What does this situation reveal about the inherent fragility and deep interdependence of modern global supply chains?
Oh, that's a good question.
And more broadly, what alternative approaches might governments consider when aiming to address trade imbalances?
Right.
Approaches that perhaps don't carry such a high risk of widespread economic disruption.
It's certainly something to reflect on as we consider the future of international trade.
Absolutely. A lot to watch unfold in the coming months and years.
Thanks for breaking it all down for us today.
You got it.
And to you, our listener, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.